Good to be back. Well, kind of, actually. I was at Disney World for a week. And honestly, I think I'd like to have stayed there, considering the news that we have to talk about today. Starting off, of course, with what's happening in Houston. Unbelievable scenes that have been coming out of there. People being rescued from rooftops, seniors waist high in water in their nursing homes. It boggles your mind. If you remember the disaster that was Hurricane Katrina and the scenes coming out of that, this is very, very similar. And you're wondering maybe, why is this happening 12 years later? Why is this response bringing back memories of that time? And it's less chaotic, but still scenes that it just defies imagination how people are coping with this in that city in the United States of America, where, if you are at Disney World, everything is wonderful. And you realize when you step away how very different it can change in a heartbeat if you bring in a natural disaster like a hurricane. Jackson Prosco, the Washington Bureau Chief for Global News and Global National, is reporting from the scene. He's been there since this disaster struck. Let's get his latest update on just what is happening in Houston.
The situation in Houston remains dire this morning. Heavy rain fell all night long, hampering the work of rescue crews who are still going door to door by boat and in some cases by helicopter, trying to rescue people who remain stranded in their homes. The water continues to rise fast. Many neighborhoods have been completely inundated with water levels reaching the second floor or the rooftop. It's so bad that officials continue to issue their dire warning to people trapped in their homes not to go into the attic, instead to make their way to the rooftop to signal for help, where they might be plucked by helicopters to safety. All night long, in fact, we saw the Coast Guard pluck people by helicopter, drop them on the freeway onto the interstate, where they could be then taken to evacuation shelters. The convention center in downtown Houston has been turned into a shelter. We're told they ran out of beds overnight. Far-flung cities like Dallas are now looking at building what they're calling mega shelters to house thousands and thousands of evacuees. And despite criticism for not evacuating the city, the mayor is standing by that decision to not issue a mandatory evacuation order before the storm arrived, saying it simply was not feasible to move 6.5 million people out of America's fourth largest city in time.
That was Jackson Prosco reporting from the scene, Washington Bureau Chief for Global News and Global National in Houston, talking about the devastating effects there of Hurricane Harvey. Some people are saying that things shouldn't be this bad in terms of the response, that is, and that more preparedness might have avoided some of the scope of this disaster. As I was saying, it's kind of hard to imagine, in 2017, with all we know and the advance warnings we can give to people of disasters that are coming, why the response is so, and the situation is so dramatic as it is. Joining us on the line now is Glenn McGillivray. He is the managing director at the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction in Toronto. Hi, Glenn.
Hi.
So you have an interesting take today in the Globe and Mail on this situation. You say why the U.S. wasn't prepared for Hurricane Harvey. So in a nutshell, why wasn't it?
Well, the U.S. hasn't been hit by a major hurricane for almost 12 years. It's been 11 years and 10 months since Wilma hit Texas and Louisiana, Florida. And I think they've kind of let their guard down, simply put. As you note, they should have been ready for this, particularly after Katrina, but they weren't. Now, I think it's important to note that nobody could have been ready for this kind of rain. There's going to be some impacts, no matter how good your city is laid out. But there certainly could have been some measures taken over the years to mitigate the full impact of this event.
Yeah, the mayor there said he didn't evacuate because evacuating would have been worse. I'd like your take on that before we get to sort of the, how the city's laid out and that kind of thing. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, that's really not my call. It's not really what we do at the Institute. We concentrate on the things that should be done before an event to mitigate the impact of it. I just hopefully, think that perhaps there should be an investigation. I'll look into that afterward and see if that was indeed the best call to make. I'm not making a judgment on it, but hopefully we look into that and learn some lessons from it.
Okay, well, let's get to some of those things that could be done. What, in your view, could have been done to mitigate the effects of a storm like this?
Well, I think if you look at the Houston area, it's the fourth largest metroplex in the United States. There's something like 6.5 million people in that metroplex. And there are kind of three things that you can lump into one when we talk about this problem. And that is the maintenance of green space, of wetlands, and density, construction and development going into that area. So on the first two notes, they've been paving over green space and wetlands there for a number of years, developing new housing complexes, getting more people into that area. And simply put, the water just has no place to go. There is a bayou that goes right through Houston, and there is a dam on the upstream of that bayou, and the Gulf of Mexico is downstream. That dam is so full of water right now, they can't release any more of it. And so they're not able to do, proper water management. There's just too much water. And part of it has to do with, getting rid of that green space, getting rid of the wetlands. We know very well that wetlands are key to managing flood.
Now, Houston is a very sprawling city. It doesn't have, it has a downtown core. It has, skyscrapers you would see in a city of its size, but it doesn't. It sprawls very flat out. Is that, I don't say a mistake, but in terms of the density, you talk about the density, in a city like Toronto, where density, we got a lot of sprawl too, but we got a lot of density, and even in places that are not necessarily in the downtown core. Should that have been part of the planning in terms of Houston and housing development to create those smaller centers like we see here in North York, for example, or other places where you have smaller downtowns?
Well, I think we know now that sprawl, urban sprawl, is not a good thing. It doesn't make for an efficient city. It doesn't make for a safe city. We're looking at the density here in Toronto and other places. Dense cities are more efficient cities, and they're better to run. Certainly from a natural catastrophe standpoint, it just means density, or sprawl rather, just means a huge amount of assets spread over a wide area. That's people, that's property, that's industrial assets. It's a whole bunch of things. And the flat, featureless nature of the Houston area combined with that sprawl is just a major disaster waiting to happen. It's easy to say this now, but, most cities in North America are historic. They've been around a long time. Many of them were centered around bodies of water for commerce, for transportation. Mm-hmm. And then we just kind of grew them from there. But it just, would have been nice if back in the day we kind of thought of these things a little bit more. And we're very careful in the way we allowed cities to develop.
Yeah, I just wanted some breaking news here. The Texas governor has just activated apparently the entire Texas National Guard now. 12,000 service members are responding to the Harvey disaster. So it's only growing in terms of scope and the scope of the response and the expense, of course, that is spent on dealing with this disaster. Can you give us a sense of how much this is going to cost?
We really don't know. I do know one disaster economist who did a quick back of the envelope, and he believes that this will be costlier than Katrina in 2005. So that's huge. And
that's in the hundreds. Is it hundreds of billions of dollars potentially?
Well, Katrina was about $106 billion economic, so that includes insured losses and uninsured losses. That's a staggering number. It's absolutely huge.
It is. And one of the things you said could have been done and has been talked about and never done would also be costly. And that's what they're calling the Ike Dike. That was after Hurricane Ike struck in 2008. A dike was supposedly considered to be constructed to protect the upper coastline of the state. Obviously, that would have a big price tag. But should such a project be considered to prevent the effects of future hurricanes?
Absolutely. I mean, coastal communities like those around Texas are in great threat of sea level rise. They're in great threat of storm surge from hurricane and coastal erosion as a result of both of those things together. So while we look at the price tag of these things and say, oh, they cost too much, the cost of inaction is way, way, way more. Mm-hmm. The impact alone on the oil and gas industry and the petrochemical industry in the Houston area is going to be massive. Up here in Canada, we're going to be feeling this with the price of gasoline later on this week. So, we're kind of short-sighted. We look at the immediate costs and kind of poo-poo it, but we have to look at the long-term costs and the other impacts as well as loss of life.
We do, definitely. And so far, the loss of life, at least, has not been as much as you would see, hopefully, at least, it's comparatively low. I'm thinking compared to disasters like this that strike in countries that have even less preparation, thinking of third world countries, for example, where, Bangladesh or other places where really you see hundreds and thousands of people sometimes killed in disasters like this. I'm wondering now about Canada, since you mentioned it. Let's take this home for a second. We saw the floods in Calgary. We've seen the fires. They're still raging in BC. How prepared are we for these kinds of disasters? Do we take disaster potential into account when we're building our cities?
Well, I don't think we can be too smug in Canada when we look at Hurricane Harvey. We've seen the hard way over the last few years that we make some of the same mistakes. We built communities right in the boreal forest, like Fort McMurray and Slave Lake, and places in British Columbia. We built communities on floodplains, as we saw in southern Alberta in 2013. Mm-hmm. And we put assets on the floodplain in Toronto, like we also saw in 2013. And Gatineau and Ottawa earlier this year. So we make some of the same foibles, and a lot of it has to do with the same things I mentioned before. Cities, the older parts of cities have been there a long time, and then we just added on to them. We didn't give much thought to things like excess water, wildfires, things of that nature. We pay the price too, and we have to be better at planning, preparedness, and how we build our communities going into the future.
We definitely do. I want to thank you so much for your insight and a lot of food for thought there going forward. Glenn McGillivray is the Managing Director at the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction in Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll keep watching, of course, what's happening in Houston. We know now that 30,000 people apparently are in shelters. The flooding is going to linger. It's now the entire National Guard of Texas has been called out to deal with this. More rain, rising rivers, and floodwaters are predicted. And about 2,000 people that had been brought to safety. There's still thousands that need help. I mean, the 911 system was overwhelmed there over the weekend. And Donald Trump is supposed to visit there tomorrow. I don't even know if he's going to get to Texas. I don't even know if he's going to be able to get to Houston with what's happening. But the president is going to be going there. So we'll see if there's more action coming from FEMA or from federal resources to help out the people that are definitely struggling there.